Chapter 4. Divination. Reseated. Steve didn't stand up again until the distant church bells tolled 7 times. Then, he slowly got up, went to the cabinet, and picked out his clothes. A black vest, matching formal wear, trousers slightly tight at the ankles, and a semi-tall hat, paired with a faint scholarly aura, made Steve feel as if he was looking at himself in a British drama telling stories of the Victorian era. I'm not going for an interview. Just to buy groceries and prepare for the transference ceremony. Suddenly, he muttered softly and shook his head with a chuckle. Klein was so preoccupied with the upcoming interview that it became an instinct to wear this only decent outfit whenever his focus waned. After a sigh, Steve took off the formal wear and vest, replacing them with a worn brown jacket and a matching round-edged felt hat. Once ready, he moved to the bunk bed, lifted the mattress on the top bunk, and reached into a discreet tear at the bottom to search for a hidden compartment. When his right hand emerged, it held a roll of banknotes, about 7 or 8, with a white-tinged dark green color. This was all the savings Benson had, including the budget for the next 3 days, with only 2 5-solar notes among them, the rest being ones. In the currency system of the Kingdom of Loan, the solar is the second tier, derived from ancient silver coins. 1 solar equals 12 copper pennies, available in denominations of 1 and 5. The top-tier currency is the gold pound, also a banknote, backed by gold and directly linked to it. 1 gold pound equals 20 solars, available in 1, 5, and 10 denominations. Steve unfolded the banknotes, smelling the faint, distinct scent of special ink. This was the smell of money. Perhaps influenced by Klein's fragmented memories or his unchanging desire for money. Steve felt a sudden affection for these little guys at that moment. Look, their designs are so exquisite, making even the stern and mustachioed George III seem adorable. Look, the watermarks seen through the sunlight are so enticing. The carefully designed security tags distinctly set them apart from the vulgar counterfeits. After admiring them for several seconds, Steve took out 2 1-solar notes, rolled the rest back up, and hid them back in the mattress's hidden compartment. Smoothing over the fabric near the tier, Steve neatly folded the 2 banknotes and placed them in the left pocket of his brown jacket, separate from the pennies in his trouser pocket. With everything in place, he pocketed the keys, grabbed a large dark brown paper bag, and headed to the door with quick steps. Tap, tap, tap. His footsteps slowed until they stopped. Steve stood by the door, his brow furrowed without him noticing. With many doubts surrounding Klein's suicide, would going out expose him to any accidents? After a moment of contemplation, Steve returned to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out the revolver shining with a brass luster. This was the only weapon he could think of for self-defense. And it was powerful enough. Although he had never practiced shooting, just pulling out the revolver would surely intimidate people. After caressing the cold metal cylinder, Steve tucked the revolver into the pocket with the banknotes, clutching the notes in his palm and pressing tightly against the gun handle. Perfectly concealed, a sense of security welled up within him. But then a concern suddenly emerged. Could it accidentally fire? Quote, bombarded with thoughts, Steve quickly found a solution. He pulled out the revolver, swung out the cylinder to the position left empty from the suicide, and snapped it back in place. This way, even if it misfired, it would just be a blank. Having resecured the revolver, Steve's left hand remained in his pocket, not to be taken out again. He adjusted his hat with his right hand, opened the door, and stepped out. The hallway was still dim during the day, with only a limited amount of sunlight coming through the windows at the end. Steve hastened down the stairs, leaving the apartment to feel the brilliance and warmth outside. Although nearing July, the peak of summer, Tingen, located in the north of the Kingdom of Loan, has unique climate characteristics. The highest temperature of the year is less than 30 degrees Celsius on Earth, and the mornings are even cooler. However, some streets are dirty with sewage and littered with garbage. In Klein's memories, places where the lower income class lived, even if equipped with sewage systems. Scenes like this were not rare, due to the high population and the necessities of life. Come, delicious pan-fried fish. Quote, hot and fresh oyster soup. Drink a bowl in the morning. Energized all day. Quote, fresh fish from the port. Only 5 pennies each. Quote, small pancakes. Eel soup with ginger beer. Quote, conchas. Quote, fresh vegetables just picked from the farms outside the city. Cheap and fresh. Quote, vendors selling vegetables, fruits, and cooked foods loudly hailed the hurried passers-by. Among them, some would stop to carefully compare and buy, while others waved them off impatiently, as today's work was yet undecided. Steve, navigating through the stench and alternating aromas with his left hand firmly on the gun handle, and clutching the banknotes, and his right hand pressing down his hat, bent slightly and lowered his head through the bustling street. Crowded places attract thieves, especially this district with many semi-unemployed laborers and hungry children forced into work. Continuing on his way, when the crowd density returned to normal, Steve straightened up and lifted his head, looking towards the street corner. There, a wandering accordion musician played, with melodies alternating between melancholic and lively. Around him gathered numerous raggedly dressed children with malnourished, yellowish complexions. Listening to the music, they moved instinctively with the rhythm, dancing their self-created moves, their faces filled with joy, as if they were little princes or angels. A numb-faced woman passed by, her skirt dirty, her skin dull. Her gaze was dull and lifeless, only lighting up slightly when looking at the children, as if seeing herself 30 years ago. Steve passed her and turned onto another street, stopping in front of Slin's Bakery. The bakery's owner was a 70-something-old lady named Wendy Slin, with entirely gray hair and a constantly gentle smile on her face. Since Klein had memory, she had been selling bread and pastries here. Her Tingen biscuits and lemon cakes were delicious. Steve swallowed and smiled. Mrs. Slin, 8 pounds of rye bread. Oh, little Klein. Benson hasn't come back yet? Wendy asked with a smile. A few more days, Steve replied vaguely. Wendy sighed while picking out the rye bread. He's such a hard-working young man. He'll find a good wife. Here. Her lips curled up mischievously. Now that's good. You've graduated. Our graduate from the history department of Hoi University tilde him. You'll soon be earning money. You shouldn't be living in such an apartment. At least you should have your own bathroom. Mrs. Slin, you're like a young and lively lady today. Steve could only respond with a dry laugh. If Klein successfully passed the interview and became a lecturer at Tingen University, the entire family would indeed head towards prosperity. In his memory fragments, he even fantasized about renting a detached house in the suburbs, with 5 or 6 rooms upstairs, 2 bathrooms, a large balcony, 2 rooms downstairs, a dining room, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a basement storage room. This wasn't a luxury. Even an intern lecturer at Tingen University would earn 2 gold pounds a week. And upon becoming official, 3 gold pounds and 10 solars. Keep in mind, Klein's brother Benson, after years of work, only made 1 pound and 10 solars a week, and the average factory worker made less than 1 pound or just over. The rent for such a detached house ranged from 19 solars to 1 pound and 18 solars. This is the difference between earning 3 to 4,000 a month and 14 to 15. thousand. Steve muttered to himself. However, all this was contingent on passing the interviews at Tingen University or Beckland University. For those without connections, it's impossible to get a recommendation to become a civil servant. And for those studying history, employment opportunities are even narrower. The demand for private consultants by nobles, bankers, or industrial tycoons isn't that high. Considering Klein's knowledge had also become fragmented and incomplete, Steve felt awkward and guilty about Mrs. Slynn's expectations. "No, I've always been this young," Wendy humorously replied. While talking, she packed the weighed 16 loaves of rye bread into Steve's large dark brown paper bag, spreading her right hand out. 9 pennies. Each loaf of rye bread weighed about 0.5 pounds. Though deviations were inevitable. 9 pennies. Wasn't it 11 pennies the other day? Steve asked instinctively. It was even 15 pennies the month before last. You should thank the repeal of the Grain Act, thank those who marched, Wendy said with a spread of her hands. Laughing, Steve nodded, understanding somewhat. Klein's memory of this was somewhat fragmented, only remembering that the core of the Grain Act was to protect the prices of domestic agricultural products, prohibiting the import of grain from southern countries like Fennes, Massey, and Lundberg until prices rose to a certain level. Why would people march against it? Without saying more, Steve, cautious not to pull out the revolver, carefully took out a banknote and handed it to Mrs. Slynn. After getting 3 copper pennies back and putting them in his trouser pocket, he carried the paper bag filled with bread and headed towards the lettuce and meat market a street away, striving for the tender pea-stewed lamb that Melissa had asked for. At the intersection of Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street, there was a municipal square where many tents had been set up, and clowns in bizarre attire were distributing flyers everywhere. A circus performance tomorrow night? Steve glanced at a flyer in someone else's hand and read the general content out loud. Melissa would definitely like it. But how much were the tickets? With this thought, Steve approached. He was about to inquire one of the red and yellow clowns when a husky female voice suddenly came from his side. "Would you like a divination?" Quote. Instinctively turning his head, Steve saw a woman standing in front of a low tent, wearing a pointed hat and a black long dress. Her face was painted with red and yellow colors, her eyes deep gray blue. No, Steve shook his head in response, not having spare money for divination. The woman smiled and said, "My tarot reading is very accurate." Tarot. Steve suddenly froze. The pronunciation was very similar to the tarot cards on Earth. And Earth's tarot cards are a type of fortune-telling deck, just with more symbolic, picture cards. Wait. He suddenly remembered the origin of tarot divination in this world. It didn't come from the 7 Orthodox deities, nor was it an ancient relic, but was invented over 170 years ago by Russell Gustav, the then premier of the Intis Republic. This Mr. Russell invented the steam engine, improved sailboats, overthrew the rule of the Intis kingdom, and was recognized by the Church of the God of Craftsmanship as the first premier of the new republic. Later, he conquered South and North, bringing countries like Lundberg under protection, making powerful northern continent nations like the Kingdom of Lowen, Fennes, and the Fossack Empire bow in succession. Then he transformed the republic back into an empire, proclaiming himself Caesar. During Russell's rule, the Church of the God of Craftsmanship received the first public oracle since the Fifth Epoch, changing the god's title to God of Steam and Machinery. Russell also invented tarot divination and established the current composition and rules of playing cards, including familiar types like Upgrade, Fight the Landlord, Texas Hold'em, Gwent. Additionally, he sent fleets through storms and turbulent waters to find a route to the southern continent. starting the colonial era. Unfortunately, in his old age, he was betrayed and assassinated in 1198 of the Fifth Epoch by the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, the original Intis royal family of the Sorin clan, and other nobles, falling at the White Maple Palace. Remembering these common knowledge points, Steve suddenly felt a toothache. Could this person have been a predecessor time traveler? With this thought, Steve became interested in seeing what the tarot cards here looked like. So he nodded to the woman with a pointed hat and painted face. If it's reasonably priced, I'll give it a try. The woman immediately smiled and said, "Sir, you're the first person to come for a divination today. It's free.